In the 1950s, families knew how to make dinners that mattered. Their work in the kitchen didn't just feed hunger, they fried buttermilk chicken and baked classic meatloaf with ketchup glaze. These 30 forgotten dinners might sound too simple today, but they kept families fed better than any drive-through ever could. Let's rediscover what grandmothers made before fast food was even discovered. Buttermilk fried chicken was the golden, crispy, juicy dinner that put every fast food chain to shame. Grandmothers soaked chicken pieces in buttermilk overnight to tenderize the meat, then dredged each piece in seasoned flour mixed with salt, pepper, paprika, and a pinch of cayenne. The chicken fried in a cast-iron skillet filled with hot lard or shortening until the crust turned deep golden brown and crackled when you bit into it. The buttermilk made the meat incredibly tender and moist, while the seasoned flour created a crunchy, flavorful crust that stayed crispy even after cooling. Buttermilk fried chicken cost around $3 to feed a family of 6 in the 1950s. A whole chicken cost 49 cents per pound, buttermilk was 25 cents a quart, and flour was pennies. This wasn't fast food, it was real food that took time but delivered flavor KFC couldn't touch. The chicken was juicy, the crust was crispy, and every bite tasted like Sunday dinner at Grandma's house, not a greasy bucket from a drive-through window. Sunday pot roast with carrots and potatoes was the slow-cooked fork-tender dinner that filled the house with the smell of home. Grandmothers seared a cheap chuck roast in a heavy Dutch oven until browned on all sides, then added chopped onions, carrots, potatoes, beef broth, and a bay leaf before covering it and sliding it into a low oven for 3 hours. The slow cooking broke down the tough meat until it fell apart with a fork, and the vegetables soaked up all the rich, beefy flavor from the roasting juices. Pot roast cost around $2.50 to feed a family in the 1950s. Chuck roast was 59 cents per pound, carrots were 10 cents a bunch, and potatoes were 5 cents per pound. This wasn't a quick meal, it was Sunday dinner that took all afternoon but delivered tender, flavorful meat and vegetables swimming in rich gravy. No deli roast beef sandwich or fast food burger could compete with the deep, slow-cooked flavor of real pot roast made at home. Before we move on, many of you asked in the comments where to find these recipes. We even received tons of email too, so we published these recipes on our website. The link is in the description. Let's continue. Classic meatloaf with ketchup glaze was the hearty, dependable dinner that stretched ground beef into a meal that fed the whole family. Grandmothers mixed ground beef with breadcrumbs, eggs, chopped onions, milk, salt, and pepper, shaped it into a loaf, and baked it in the oven for an hour. Halfway through, they brushed the top with a tangy glaze made from ketchup, brown sugar, and a splash of vinegar that caramelized into a sticky, sweet crust. The meatloaf was moist, savory, and packed with flavor, and the leftovers made perfect sandwiches the next day. Meatloaf cost around $2 to feed a family in the 1950s. Ground beef was 49 cents per pound, breadcrumbs were pennies, and eggs were 60 cents a dozen. This wasn't processed frozen dinner, it was real beef mixed with real ingredients and baked until golden. No fast food burger patty could match the rich, homemade flavor of a slice of meatloaf with mashed potatoes and gravy on the side. Swiss steak with tomato gravy was the slow-braised, fork-tender dinner that turned cheap round steak into something special. Grandmothers pounded round steak with a meat mallet to tenderize it, dredged it in seasoned flour, browned it in a hot skillet, then simmered it for 2 hours in a rich tomato gravy made with canned tomatoes, onions, celery, and beef broth. The long, slow cooking broke down the tough meat until it was tender enough to cut with a fork, and the tomato gravy was thick, tangy and perfect for soaking up with mashed potatoes or rice. Swiss steak cost around $2.25 to feed a family in the 1950s. Round steak was 79 cents per pound, canned tomatoes were 15 cents a can, and onions were 5 cents per pound. This wasn't a quick meal, it was slow-cooked comfort that delivered deep, savory flavor. No fast food steak sandwich could compete with the tender, braised richness of real Swiss steak made at home. Salisbury steak with mushroom gravy was the diner-style dinner that turned ground beef into something that felt like a real steak. Grandmothers mixed ground beef with breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, salt, and pepper, shaped it into oval patties, browned them in a skillet, then simmered them in a rich mushroom gravy made with beef broth, sliced mushrooms, and a splash of Worcestershire sauce. The patties were juicy and flavorful, and the gravy was thick, savory, and perfect for pouring over mashed potatoes. Salisbury steak cost around $2 to feed a family in the 1950s. Ground beef was 49 cents per pound, fresh mushrooms were 39 cents per pound, and beef broth was pennies. This wasn't a frozen TV dinner, it was homemade beef patties in real gravy made from scratch. No fast food burger could match the rich, savory flavor of Salisbury steak with thick mushroom gravy and a pile of creamy mashed potatoes on the side. These 5 dinners prove that 1950s home cooking delivered flavor, tenderness, and real ingredients that fast food could never match. From crispy fried chicken to slow-braised Swiss steak, every meal was made from scratch and tasted better than anything wrapped in paper. The next 5 keep that tradition alive. Old-fashioned chicken and dumplings was the comforting, stick-to-your-ribs dinner that turned a whole chicken into a pot of creamy, fluffy goodness. Grandmothers simmered a whole chicken in a large pot with onions, celery, carrots, and bay leaves until the meat fell off the bone, then removed the chicken, shredded the meat, and dropped spoonfuls of thick dumpling dough into the bubbling broth. The dumplings cooked until fluffy and tender, soaking up the rich chicken flavor, and the result was a thick, hearty stew that filled bowls and stomachs. Chicken and dumplings cost around $2.50 to feed a family in the 1950s. A whole chicken was 49 cents per pound, flour was pennies, and vegetables were cheap. This wasn't canned soup, it was homemade comfort in a bowl with tender chicken, fluffy dumplings, and rich broth. No fast food chicken sandwich could compete with the creamy, soul-warming flavor of real chicken and dumplings made from scratch. Herb-roasted chicken with root vegetables was the Sunday centerpiece dinner that filled the house with the smell of rosemary, thyme, and roasted meat. Grandmothers rubbed a whole chicken with butter, salt, pepper, garlic, and dried herbs, then surrounded it with chopped carrots, potatoes, turnips, and onions in a roasting pan. The chicken roasted in a hot oven for 2 hours until the skin turned golden and crispy, and the vegetables caramelized in the chicken drippings. Herb-roasted chicken cost around $2.75 to feed a family in the 1950s. A whole chicken was 49 cents per pound, carrots were 10 cents a bunch, potatoes were 5 cents per pound, and dried herbs were pennies. This wasn't rotisserie chicken from a grocery store, it was a whole roasted bird with crispy skin, juicy meat, and vegetables roasted in natural drippings. No fast food chicken meal could compete with the golden, herb-scented perfection of a whole roasted chicken straight from the oven. Creamy chicken la king was the fancy-feeling dinner that turned leftover chicken into something special enough for company. Grandmothers diced cooked chicken and simmered it in a creamy white sauce made with butter, flour, milk, chicken broth, diced pimientos, sliced mushrooms, and a splash of sherry. The mixture cooked until thick and creamy, then was served over toasted bread, biscuits, or puff pastry shells. The sauce was rich, smooth, and packed with flavor, and the colorful pimientos made it look restaurant quality. Chicken La King cost around $2.25 to feed a family in the 1950s. Leftover chicken was free, canned mushrooms were 25 cents, and milk was 25 cents a quart. This wasn't canned soup dumped over bread, it was a rich, homemade cream sauce with real chicken and vegetables. No fast food chicken sandwich could compete with the creamy, elegant flavor of Chicken La King served over buttery toast. Homemade beef pot pie was the ultimate comfort dinner that wrapped tender beef and vegetables in a flaky, buttery crust. Grandmothers browned chunks of beef in a skillet, simmered them with carrots, peas, potatoes, and onions in beef gravy until tender, then poured the mixture into a deep pie dish and covered it with homemade pie dough. The pie baked in the oven until the crust turned golden brown and flaky, and the filling bubbled up around the edges. Beef pot pie cost around $3 to feed a family in the 1950s. Chuck roast was 59 cents per pound, frozen vegetables were 20 cents a bag, and flour for the crust was pennies. This wasn't a frozen pot pie from the grocery store, it was a homemade dinner with real beef, real vegetables, and a flaky crust made from scratch. No fast food meal could match the rich, savory filling wrapped in buttery, golden pastry. Glazed baked ham with pineapple was the centerpiece dinner that fed a family for days and looked impressive on the table. Grandmothers scored a bone-in ham in a diamond pattern, studded it with whole cloves, covered it with pineapple rings secured with toothpicks, and brushed it with a sweet glaze made from brown sugar, mustard, and pineapple juice. The ham baked slowly in the oven until the glaze caramelized into a sticky, golden crust, and the pineapple turned soft and sweet. Baked ham cost around $4 to feed a family in the 1950s. A whole ham was 59 cents per pound, canned pineapple was 30 cents, and brown sugar was pennies. This wasn't deli meat slapped on a bun, it was a whole roasted ham with a sweet, tangy glaze and juicy pineapple. No fast food sandwich could compete with thick slices of glazed ham served with scalloped potatoes and green beans. These 10 dinners prove that 1950s home cooking was built on real meat, slow roasting, and ingredients you could actually pronounce. From crispy fried chicken to glazed baked ham, every meal took time but delivered flavor fast food will never match. The next 10 keep proving why homemade always wins. Sunday roasted chicken with pan gravy was the weekly tradition that brought families to the table for a meal that smelled like heaven. Grandmothers seasoned a whole chicken inside and out with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, stuffed the cavity with halved onions and lemon, then roasted it in a hot oven until the skin turned golden brown and crispy. While the chicken rested, they scraped up all the brown bits from the roasting pan, added flour to make a roux, then whisked in chicken broth and drippings to create smooth, rich gravy. Sunday roasted chicken cost around $2.50 to feed a family in the 1950s. A whole chicken cost 49 cents per pound, onions were 5 cents, and broth was pennies. The roasted chicken had crispy golden skin that crackled when you bit into it, and the meat was juicy, tender, and full of flavor from slow roasting. The pan gravy was rich, savory, thick, and deeply flavored from the drippings and browned bits. This wasn't a rotisserie chicken from a grocery store with rubbery skin and dry meat. It was a whole bird roasted at home with crackling crispy skin, tender juicy meat, and homemade gravy made from real pan drippings. No fast food chicken sandwich, bucket of fried chicken, or drive-through meal could compete with the deep roasted flavor of a whole chicken cooked slow in the oven and served with rich pan gravy, mashed potatoes, and all the trimmings on Sunday. Creamy beef stroganoff over egg noodles was the rich, elegant dinner that turns strips of beef into something that tasted like a restaurant meal. Grandmothers sliced beef sirloin or round steak into thin strips, browned them quickly in a hot skillet with butter and sliced onions, then stirred in sliced mushrooms, beef broth, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, and a generous dollop of sour cream to create a thick, creamy sauce that coated everything. The mixture simmered until the beef was tender and the sauce was velvety smooth, then was spooned over a bed of buttered egg noodles. Beef stroganoff cost around $3 to feed a family in the 1950s. Beef sirloin was 89 cents per pound, fresh mushrooms were 39 cents per pound, sour cream was 30 cents, and egg noodles were 25 cents a bag. The beef was tender and savory, the mushrooms added earthy flavor, and the sour cream sauce was rich, tangy, and coated every noodle perfectly. This wasn't a TV dinner or frozen meal with mystery meat and artificial sauce. It was tender strips of real beef in a homemade cream sauce with fresh mushrooms and real sour cream. No fast food burger or steak sandwich could match the rich, creamy, savory flavor of beef stroganoff served over a pile of buttered egg noodles with a side of green beans or peas. Chicken fricassee with vegetables was the old-world dinner that braised chicken pieces in a creamy sauce until fork tender and falling off the bone. Grandmothers browned chicken pieces in a deep skillet with butter until golden, removed them, then sauteed chopped onions, carrots, celery, and mushrooms in the same pan to soak up all the chicken flavor. They returned the chicken to the skillet, poured in chicken broth and a splash of white wine or lemon juice, covered it tightly, and let everything simmer gently for an hour until the chicken was tender and the vegetables were soft. At the end, they stirred in heavy cream and fresh parsley to create a rich, silky sauce that tied everything together. Chicken fricassee cost around $2.75 to feed a family in the 1950s. A whole chicken cut into pieces cost 49 cents per pound, carrots and celery were 10 cents each, mushrooms were 39 cents, and cream was 40 cents a pint. The chicken was fall-off-the-bone tender, the vegetables were soft and flavorful, and the creamy sauce was rich and velvety. This wasn't canned soup poured over chicken, it was a slow braised dish with real cream, fresh vegetables, and chicken that cooked until it practically melted. No fast food chicken meal could touch the tender, creamy richness of chicken fricassee served over rice or mashed potatoes. Traditional shepherd's pie with lamb was the hearty, layered dinner that stretched ground lamb into a complete meal baked under a golden mashed potato crust. Grandmothers browned ground lamb with diced onions and garlic until no pink remained, stirred in diced carrots, peas, and corn, then added beef broth, tomato paste, Worcestershire sauce, and a pinch of thyme to create a rich, savory filling. The mixture simmered until thick and bubbly, then was spread in a deep baking dish and topped with a thick layer of mashed potatoes that were smoothed out and dragged with a fork to create peaks that would crisp up. The whole thing baked in the oven until the potato topping turned golden brown and crispy on the peaks. Shepherd's pie cost around $3 to feed a family in the 1950s. Ground lamb was 79 cents per pound, frozen mixed vegetables were 20 cents a bag, and potatoes were 5 cents per pound. The lamb filling was rich, savory, and packed with vegetables, and the mashed potato topping was creamy inside with crispy, golden peaks on top. This wasn't a frozen pot pie with mystery meat and watery gravy. It was a real casserole with layers of seasoned lamb, vegetables, and fluffy mashed potatoes baked until bubbling. No fast food meal could compete with the hearty, comforting layers of shepherd's pie. Baked chicken tetrazzini was the creamy, cheesy pasta casserole that turned leftover chicken into a dish fancy enough for company. Grandmothers cooked spaghetti until tender, then tossed it with diced cooked chicken, sliced mushrooms, and a rich cream sauce made from butter, flour, chicken broth, heavy cream, and a splash of sherry for depth. The mixture was poured into a buttered casserole dish, topped generously with grated Parmesan cheese and toasted breadcrumbs, then baked in a hot oven until golden and bubbly. Chicken tetrazzini cost around $2.50 to feed a family in the 1950s. Leftover chicken was free, spaghetti was 15 cents a box, canned mushrooms were 25 cents, cream was 40 cents, and Parmesan was 50 cents. The pasta was coated in a velvety cream sauce, the chicken was tender and flavorful, the mushrooms added earthy richness, and the topping was golden and crunchy. This wasn't boxed mac and cheese with orange powder, it was a sophisticated casserole with real cream, real chicken, and real Parmesan cheese, baked until the top was crispy and the inside was creamy. No fast food pasta dish could match the rich, creamy, cheesy perfection of chicken tetrazzini bubbling straight from the oven, served with a green salad and garlic bread. These 5 dinners show how 1950s cooks turned simple ingredients into restaurant-quality meals at home. From whole roasted chickens to creamy beef stroganoff, every dish delivered flavor, comfort, and real ingredients that cost less than any drive-thru. The next 5 prove homemade always beats fast food. Red wine-braised beef short ribs was the special occasion dinner that turned tough, cheap ribs into fall-off-the-bone tender meat with a rich, glossy sauce. Grandmothers seasoned beef short ribs with salt and pepper, seared them in a hot Dutch oven until deeply browned on all sides, then removed them and sautéed chopped onions, carrots, and celery in the same pot to soak up the beef flavor. They returned the ribs to the pot, poured in red wine and beef broth until the liquid came halfway up the ribs, added bay leaves and thyme, covered it tightly, and let it braise in a low oven for 3 hours until the meat fell off the bone. Braised short ribs cost around $3.50 to feed a family in the 1950s. Beef short ribs were 69 cents per pound, cheap red wine was 80 cents a bottle, and vegetables were pennies. The meat was so tender it slid off the bone with a fork, and the sauce was rich, dark, and deeply flavored from the red wine and long braising time. This wasn't fast food. It was a slow-cooked dish that took all afternoon but delivered restaurant-quality results with melt-in-your-mouth meat. No fast food rib sandwich could compete with the fall-apart tenderness of braised short ribs in red wine sauce, served over mashed potatoes. Country fried steak with white gravy was the Southern dinner that turned cheap cube steak into crispy, golden perfection smothered in creamy gravy. Grandmothers pounded cube steak thin with a meat mallet to tenderize it even more, dredged each piece in seasoned flour, dipped it in buttermilk, then dredged it again in flour to create a thick coating before frying it in hot oil until golden brown and crispy on both sides. After the steaks fried, they made gravy in the same skillet by stirring flour into the leftover oil and browned bits, then whisking in milk and black pepper until thick and creamy. Country fried steak cost around $2.25 to feed a family in the 1950s. Cube steak was 69 cents per pound, flour was pennies, buttermilk was 25 cents a quart, and milk was 25 cents. The steak was crispy and crunchy on the outside, tender inside, and the white gravy was thick, peppery, and rich, with flavor from the pan drippings. This wasn't a frozen chicken fried steak patty with artificial breading. It was real beef pounded thin, double-dredged and fried until golden, then smothered in homemade gravy made from scratch. No fast food chicken sandwich could match the crispy, creamy, peppery perfection of country fried steak. Rice-stuffed bell peppers was the colorful, complete dinner that turned ground beef and rice into individual servings baked inside sweet peppers. Grandmothers cut the tops off large bell peppers and removed all the seeds and membranes, then stuffed each pepper with a mixture of browned ground beef, cooked rice, diced onions, canned tomatoes, minced garlic, salt, and pepper. The stuffed peppers stood upright in a baking dish with a little water in the bottom to keep them from drying out, were topped with a spoonful of tomato sauce, then baked in the oven until the peppers were tender and the filling was hot and bubbly. Stuffed peppers cost around $2 to feed a family in the 1950s. Bell peppers were 10 cents each, ground beef was 49 cents per pound, rice was 15 cents a box, and canned tomatoes were 15 cents. The peppers were sweet and tender after baking, the beef and rice filling was savory and flavorful, and the tomato sauce on top added tangy richness. This wasn't a burger in a bun with lettuce and tomato, it was a complete meal with meat, vegetables, and starch all baked together in one colorful, edible package. Herb-roasted chicken with butter was the golden, crispy skinned dinner that made Sunday smell like rosemary, thyme, and roasted garlic. Grandmothers rubbed a whole chicken inside and out with softened butter mixed with minced garlic, dried rosemary, thyme, salt, and black pepper, making sure every inch was coated, then placed it on a roasting rack in a pan and roasted it in a hot oven for 2 hours until the skin was deep golden, brown, and crispy. The butter basted the chicken as it roasted, keeping the meat juicy and flavorful while creating a crispy herb-scented crust that crackled when you bit into it. Herb-roasted chicken cost around $2.50 to feed a family in the 1950s. A whole chicken was 49 cents per pound. Butter was 60 cents a pound, and dried herbs were pennies. The roasted chicken had crispy golden skin that crackled loudly when you bit into it, and the meat was juicy, tender, and infused with butter and herbs in every bite. This wasn't a drive-through rotisserie chicken with rubbery skin and dry breast meat. It was a whole bird roasted at home with real butter, real herbs, and real flavor that filled the house. No fast food chicken could compete with the crispy, juicy, herb-scented perfection of a whole roasted chicken straight from the oven. Slow-cooked beef stew with root vegetables was the hearty, warming dinner that simmered all afternoon and filled the house with the smell of home. Grandmothers browned chunks of beef chuck in a heavy pot until deeply caramelized, removed them, then sauteed chopped onions and garlic in the same pot to pick up all the beef flavor. They returned the beef, added beef broth, canned tomatoes, bay leaves, and thyme, then tossed in chunks of carrots, potatoes, turnips, and celery. The pot simmered on low heat for 3 hours until the beef was fork tender and the vegetables were soft and flavorful, and the broth thickened into a rich gravy. Beef stew cost around $2.75 to feed a family in the 1950s. Beef chuck was 59 cents per pound, carrots were 10 cents a bunch, potatoes were 5 cents per pound, and canned tomatoes were 15 cents. The beef was melt-in-your-mouth tender, the vegetables were soft and sweet, and the broth was rich, beefy, and thick with flavor from hours of slow cooking. This wasn't canned stew with mystery meat and watery gravy. It was homemade comfort with real beef, real vegetables, and real broth simmered for hours until perfect. No fast food meal could match the deep, slow-cooked flavor of beef stew served with crusty bread. These 20 dinners prove that 1950s home cooking delivered more flavor, more nutrition, and more satisfaction than any fast food chain ever could. From braised short ribs to slow-cooked stew, every meal was made from scratch with real ingredients. Smothered pork chops in onion gravy was the tender, savory dinner that turned simple pork chops into something special by slow cooking them in a rich, flavorful gravy made from scratch in a cast-iron skillet. Grandmothers seasoned thick-cut pork chops generously with coarse salt, freshly cracked black pepper, garlic powder, and paprika on both sides, making sure every inch was covered with seasoning, then browned them in a hot cast-iron skillet with a little vegetable oil until deeply golden brown on both sides, but not cooked all the way through, so they wouldn't dry out during the long simmering process. They removed the browned chops from the skillet and set them aside on a plate, then cooked thinly sliced yellow onions in the same skillet over medium heat, scraping up all the browned bits and fond stuck to the bottom of the pan to add deep flavor to the developing gravy. The onions cooked slowly for about 15 minutes, stirring occasionally until they were soft, golden, sweet, and completely caramelized. Once the onions were perfectly caramelized, grandmothers sprinkled a few tablespoons of all-purpose flour over them to create a roux, stirring it constantly for a minute or two to cook out the raw flour taste and create a base for the gravy. They slowly whisked in beef broth a generous splash of Worcestershire sauce and a little black pepper until the gravy was smooth, thick, lump-free, and glossy. The brown pork chops went back into the skillet, nestled deep into the rich onion gravy, then the whole thing was covered with a tight-fitting lid and simmered gently on low heat for 45 minutes until the pork chops were fork-tender, juicy, and the gravy was deeply flavored and reduced to. Smothered pork chops cost around $2.50 to feed a family of 6 in the 1950s. Thick-cut pork chops were 59 cents per pound and usually came 4 to 6 chops per package. Yellow onions were 5 cents per pound, all-purpose flour was pennies per cup, and canned beef broth was 10 cents per can. The finished pork chops were so tender they practically fell apart when you cut into them with a fork, and the onion gravy was thick, rich, savory, sweet from the long-cooked caramelized onions, and absolutely perfect for pouring over creamy mashed potatoes, fluffy white rice, or warm homemade biscuits to soak up every single drop of that delicious gravy. This wasn't a dry, overcooked pork chop from a fast food restaurant menu or a frozen breaded pork patty reheated in a microwave and served on a sad bun. It was real bone in pork chops, slow-cooked low and slow in homemade onion gravy until fork-tender and melting. Holiday roast turkey with sage dressing was the centerpiece dinner that fed a crowd and made the entire house smell like Thanksgiving for hours on end. Grandmothers thawed a whole turkey in the refrigerator for several days, removed the giblets and neck from the cavity, rinsed the bird thoroughly inside and out with cold water, then patted it completely dry with paper towels so the skin would crisp up properly during roasting. They rubbed the entire bird generously with softened butter mixed with coarse salt, freshly cracked black pepper, garlic powder, onion powder, and dried sage, making sure to get butter under the skin and all over the legs and wings. They stuffed the cavity loosely with homemade bread dressing made from cubed stale white bread, sauteed onions and celery, chicken broth, beaten eggs, melted butter, and plenty of dried sage and thyme for that classic holiday flavor. The legs were tied together with kitchen twine to keep the stuffing inside, and the whole turkey was placed breast side up on a roasting rack in a large roasting pan. The turkey roasted in a moderate oven at 325 degrees for 3 to 4 hours depending on size, basting every 30 minutes with the accumulated pan drippings to keep the meat moist and create a golden, crispy skin. When a meat thermometer inserted into the thickest part of the thigh read 165 degrees and the juices ran clear, the turkey was done and needed to rest for 30 minutes before carving. While the turkey rested, grandmothers made rich gravy from the pan drippings by adding flour to create a roux, then whisking in turkey stock and the reserved giblet broth until smooth, thick, and glossy. Holiday roast turkey cost around $5 to feed a large extended family in the 1950s. A whole turkey was 39 cents per pound and typically weighed between 12 and 15 pounds. A loaf of bread for the dressing was 25 cents. Onions and celery were 10 cents each. Butter was 60 cents a pound, and eggs were 60 cents a dozen. The finished roasted turkey had deeply golden, crispy skin that crackled when carved, and the meat underneath was juicy, tender, flavorful, and infused with butter and sage in every bite. The homemade bread dressing was moist, savory, packed with herbs, and cooked inside the bird so it soaked up all the delicious turkey juices and flavor. This wasn't a deli turkey breast sliced paper thin and piled on a sandwich with mayonnaise. It was a whole roasted bird with crackling, crispy skin, tender, juicy meat, homemade sage dressing, and rich gravy made from real pan drippings. No fast food turkey sandwich or frozen turkey dinner could compete. Ham steaks with red-eye coffee gravy was the traditional Southern specialty dinner that combined salty, smoky ham with a rich, unusual gravy made from strong black coffee and pan drippings. Grandmothers cut thick slices from a cured smoked ham steak about half an inch thick and fried them in a hot cast iron skillet without any added oil because the ham released enough fat on its own. The ham steaks sizzled and browned in the hot skillet until the edges turned crispy and caramelized and the meat was heated all the way through. They removed the fried ham steaks from the skillet and set them aside on a warm plate, then immediately made the famous red-eye gravy by deglazing the hot skillet with strong black coffee, scraping up all the browned bits, salty ham drippings, and caramelized fond stuck to the bottom of the pan. With a wooden spoon, the coffee sizzled and steamed as it hit the hot pan, reducing slightly and thickening as it cooked down and concentrated all the flavors. Some grandmothers added a pinch of brown sugar to balance the bitterness of the coffee and the saltiness of the ham, but traditional old-school red-eye gravy was just strong black coffee and ham drippings with nothing else added. The finished gravy was thin, dark, intensely flavored, salty, slightly bitter, and completely unique compared to any other gravy. Ham steaks with red-eye coffee gravy cost around $2 to feed a family of 6 in the 1950s. A thick-cut, pre-sliced ham steak cost 69 cents per pound and easily fed 4 to 6 people depending on portion size, and strong black coffee was just pennies per cup since most families already had coffee in the house. Golden breaded veal cutlets was the elegant Italian-style dinner that turned tender veal into crispy golden perfection with a crunchy coating. Grandmothers pounded thin veal cutlets even thinner with a meat mallet until they were almost translucent and uniformly thin so they would cook quickly and evenly without drying out. They set up a classic 3-step breading station with 3 shallow dishes lined up on the counter. One dish filled with all-purpose flour seasoned generously with salt and black pepper. One dish filled with beaten eggs mixed with a splash of milk to thin them out, and one dish filled with fine, Italian-style breadcrumbs mixed with freshly grated Parmesan cheese and dried Italian herbs like basil, oregano, and parsley. Each delicate veal cutlet was carefully dredged first in the seasoned flour and shaken off to remove excess, then dipped in the beaten egg mixture to coat both sides completely, then pressed firmly into the breadcrumb mixture to create a thick, even coating that would turn golden and crispy when the breaded cutlets were fried immediately in hot vegetable oil or olive oil in a large skillet until deeply golden brown and crispy on both sides, which only took about 3 minutes per side because the veal was so thin. Golden breaded veal cutlets cost around $3.50 to feed a family of 6 in the 1950s. Veal cutlets were $1.29 per pound and usually came 4 to 6 thin cutlets per package. Eggs were 60 cents a dozen, Italian-style breadcrumbs were 20 cents a canister, and freshly grated Parmesan cheese was 50 cents for a small wedge. Tarragon chicken pot pie was the ultimate comfort dinner that wrapped tender chicken and vegetables in a flaky, buttery, homemade crust with a hint of fresh tarragon for elegance. Grandmothers started by poaching a whole chicken in a large pot of water with chopped onions, carrots, celery, and bay leaves until the meat was tender and falling off the bone, which took about an hour of gentle simmering. They removed the chicken from the pot, let it cool slightly, then shredded all the meat off the bones and reserved the flavorful poaching broth for making the sauce. In a large saucepan, they made a thick cream sauce by melting butter, stirring in flour to create a roux, then slowly whisking in the reserved chicken broth and heavy cream until the sauce was smooth, thick, and velvety. They added the shredded chicken, diced cooked carrots, frozen or fresh peas, diced cooked potatoes, and a generous amount of fresh or dried tarragon, which added a subtle licorice-like flavor that elevated the whole dish. The creamy chicken and vegetable mixture was poured into a deep pie dish or casserole, then topped with a layer of homemade pie dough rolled thin, crimped carefully around the edges to seal in all the filling, and brushed with beaten egg to give it a beautiful golden shine when baked. The pot pie baked in a hot oven until the crust was flaky golden brown, and the filling bubbled up around the edges. Tarragon chicken pot pie cost around $3 to feed a family of 6 in the 1950s. A whole chicken was 49 cents per pound. Frozen mixed vegetables were 20 cents a bag, heavy cream was 40 cents a pint, and flour and butter for the crust were pennies. The finished pot pie had a flaky, buttery, golden crust that shattered when you cut into it, and the filling was creamy, rich, packed with tender chicken and vegetables, and subtly flavored with tarragon. This wasn't a frozen pot pie from the grocery store with a soggy crust and mystery meat in watery gravy. It was a homemade pie with real chicken, real vegetables, real cream sauce, and a flaky pie crust made completely from scratch. No fast food chicken sandwich, nuggets, or drive-through meal could compete with the rich, creamy, flaky perfection of Tarragon chicken pot pie served hot from the oven with a side of cranberry sauce. These 5 dinners show how 1950s cooks turned everyday ingredients into elegant, flavorful meals that required time but delivered satisfaction. From smothered pork chops to Tarragon chicken pot pie, every dish was made from scratch with real ingredients. The final 5 prove homemade always beats fast food. Wine-braised lamb shanks was the elegant special occasion dinner that turned tough, inexpensive lamb shanks into fall-off-the-bone-tender meat with a rich, glossy, deeply flavored sauce that tasted like a fancy restaurant meal. Grandmothers seasoned lamb shanks generously on all sides with coarse salt, freshly cracked black pepper, and dried rosemary, making sure every inch was covered with seasoning, then seared them in a hot Dutch oven with olive oil until deeply browned and caramelized on all sides, which took about 10 minutes and created a flavorful crust and fond on the bottom of the pot that would add depth to the sauce. They removed the brown shanks and set them aside on a plate, then sauteed chopped yellow onions, carrots, celery, and minced garlic in the same pot, scraping up all the brown bits stuck to the bottom to incorporate that flavor into the vegetables. They returned the lamb shanks to the pot, arranging them in a single layer, then poured in red wine and beef broth until the liquid came about halfway up the shanks but didn't cover them completely, so the tops would stay crispy. They added bay leaves, fresh thyme sprigs, a tablespoon of tomato paste for depth and richness, and a pinch of sugar to balance the acidity of the wine. The pot was covered tightly with a heavy lid and placed in a low oven at 300 degrees for 3 hours, checking occasionally to make sure the liquid hadn't evaporated too much and adding more broth if needed. After 3 hours of slow braising in the oven, the lamb was so tender it fell off the bone with the gentlest touch of a fork, and the sauce had reduced and thickened into a rich, glossy, deeply flavored gravy that coated the back of a spoon. Wine-braised lamb shanks cost around $4 to feed a family of 4 in the 1950s. Lamb shanks were 79 cents per pound and usually came 2 to 4 shanks per package depending on size. A bottle of cheap red wine was 80 cents, and vegetables like onions, carrots, and celery were just pennies per pound. The finished lamb was melt-in-your-mouth tender with meat that slid off the bone effortlessly with just a fork, and the sauce was rich, dark, complex, and deeply flavored from the red wine, vegetables, and long braising time in the oven. This wasn't fast food or anything that could be rushed or hurried. It was a slow-cooked dish that took all afternoon but delivered restaurant-quality results with meat so tender you could eat it with a spoon and sauce so flavorful it didn't need anything else. Herb-crusted pork roast with roasted potatoes was the Sunday centerpiece dinner that combined tender, juicy pork with crispy, golden potatoes roasted in pork drippings until they were perfectly crispy on the outside and fluffy on the inside. Grandmothers rubbed a boneless pork loin roast all over with a thick paste made from minced fresh garlic, olive oil, dried rosemary, thyme, sage, coarse salt, and freshly cracked black pepper until every single inch of the roast was completely coated in the aromatic herb mixture that would form a flavorful crust during roasting. They placed the seasoned roast on a roasting rack in a large roasting pan to allow air to circulate around it, then surrounded it with quartered Yukon Gold or russet potatoes that had been tossed in olive oil, coarse salt, and freshly cracked black pepper. The roast went into a moderate oven preheated to 350 degrees and cooked for about 2.5 hours, basting occasionally with the accumulated pan drippings to keep the meat moist, flavorful, and to help develop a golden crust on the outside. The potatoes roasted in the pork drippings and rendered fat that dripped down from the roast, becoming crispy and golden brown on the outside while staying tender and fluffy on the inside. When a meat thermometer inserted into the thickest part of the roast read 145 degrees, the pork was perfectly cooked and needed to rest for 15 minutes before slicing to allow the juices to redistribute throughout the meat. Herb-crusted pork roast cost around $3.50 to feed a family of 6 in the 1950s. A boneless pork loin roast was 79 cents per pound and typically weighed 3 to 4 pounds. Potatoes were 5 cents per pound. Olive oil was 60 cents a bottle, and dried herbs and fresh garlic were just pennies. The finished pork roast was juicy, tender, flavorful, perfectly cooked to a beautiful rosy pink in the center, and the herb crust was aromatic, fragrant, golden brown, and packed with garlic and herbs that penetrated deep into the meat during the long roasting time. The roasted potatoes were crispy and golden brown on the outside, tender and fluffy inside, and completely soaked up all the pork flavor from the drippings that fell into the pan. This wasn't a fast food pork sandwich with processed mystery meat or a frozen breaded pork patty reheated in a microwave and served on a sad bun. It was a whole roast cooked slowly and carefully in the oven with real herbs, real garlic, and real flavor that filled the entire house with the incredible smell of roasted meat and herbs. Baked stuffed chicken breasts was the elegant dinner that turned simple chicken into something special and fancy enough for company by filling it with a savory breadcrumb stuffing that stayed moist and flavorful inside each roll. Grandmothers pounded boneless, skinless chicken breasts thin with a meat mallet until they were uniformly flat and about half an inch thick all over, which made them much easier to roll tightly and ensured even cooking throughout. They spread each flattened chicken breast with a generous amount of seasoned breadcrumb stuffing made from toasted cubed white bread, sauteed diced onions and celery, melted butter, chicken broth, beaten eggs, and plenty of dried sage and thyme for that classic poultry stuffing flavor everyone loved at Thanksgiving. Each chicken breast was rolled tightly around the stuffing like a jelly roll or cinnamon roll, secured with wooden toothpicks inserted through the seam to keep it from unrolling during baking. Then placed seam side down in a buttered baking dish so the toothpicks wouldn't be visible. The rolled chicken breasts were brushed generously all over with melted butter and sprinkled with paprika for color and a hint of smoky flavor, then baked uncovered in a moderate oven preheated to 375 degrees for about 45 minutes until golden brown on top and cooked all the way through with no pink remaining in the center. Baked stuffed chicken breasts cost around $3 to feed a family of 6 in the 1950s. Boneless, skinless chicken breasts were 79 cents per pound, a loaf of white bread for the stuffing was 25 cents, onions and celery were 10 cents each, butter was 60 cents a pound, and eggs were 60 cents a dozen. The finished chicken breasts were tender, juicy, flavorful, and perfectly cooked through. And the stuffing inside was moist, savory, packed with herbs, and stayed perfectly contained inside each roll without leaking out. When sliced crosswise with a sharp knife, each chicken breast revealed a beautiful spiral of white chicken meat wrapped around golden breadcrumb stuffing that looked as impressive and fancy as it tasted delicious. This wasn't a frozen stuffed chicken breast with artificial filling and mystery ingredients you couldn't pronounce. It was fresh chicken pounded thin by hand, stuffed with homemade breadcrumb stuffing, rolled carefully, and baked until golden brown and absolutely delicious with real ingredients and real flavor. Beef and mushroom casserole was the hearty, one-dish dinner that combined tender beef, earthy mushrooms, and egg noodles in a rich, creamy sauce baked until bubbly and golden on top, with a crunchy breadcrumb crust. Grandmothers browned cubes of beef chuck in a hot skillet with a little vegetable oil until deeply caramelized and browned on all sides, developing a rich, beefy flavor and creating fondant stuck to the bottom of the pan that would add incredible depth to the sauce later. They removed the browned beef and set it aside on a plate, then sauteed sliced fresh mushrooms and diced yellow onions in the same pan, scraping up all the brown bits stuck to the bottom to incorporate that beefy flavor into the mushrooms and onions as they cooked. They returned the beef to the skillet, stirred in beef broth, a can of cream of mushroom soup, a generous dollop of sour cream, a splash of Worcestershire sauce, coarse salt, and freshly cracked black pepper. Then brought everything to a gentle simmer and let it cook covered on low heat until the beef was fork tender and falling apart, which took about 45 minutes of gentle simmering. Meanwhile, they cooked egg noodles according to package directions until tender but not mushy or overcooked, drained them well in a colander to remove all the excess water, then stirred them into the beef and mushroom mixture until everything was evenly combined and coated in the creamy sauce. Everything was poured into a large buttered casserole dish, topped generously with toasted buttered breadcrumbs for crunch and texture, then baked uncovered in a moderate oven preheated to 350 degrees until golden and bubbly around the edges with the breadcrumbs crispy on top. Beef and mushroom casserole cost around $3 to feed a family of 6 in the 1950s, making it an affordable weeknight dinner. Beef chuck was 59 cents per pound, fresh mushrooms were 39 cents per pound, a can of cream of mushroom soup was 10 cents, sour cream was 30 cents, and egg noodles were 25 cents a bag. The finished casserole had tender, savory beef that melted in your mouth, earthy mushrooms that added depth and umami flavor, egg noodles coated in a rich and creamy sauce, and a golden, crunchy breadcrumb topping that added texture and crunch. This wasn't a frozen casserole with mystery meat and watery artificial sauce full of preservatives. It was a homemade dish with real beef, real mushrooms, real cream, and real noodles baked until bubbling and golden brown on top with a crunchy topping that everyone fought over at the dinner table. Every time it was served for Sunday supper. Garlic butter roasted chicken thighs was the budget-friendly dinner that delivered crispy, crackling skin and juicy, tender meat with minimal effort and maximum flavor for the whole family to enjoy around the dinner table. Grandmothers arranged bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs in a single layer in a large roasting pan or baking dish, making absolutely sure they weren't crowded or overlapping so the skin would crisp up properly instead of steaming and staying rubbery and chewy. They rubbed each chicken thigh generously all over with softened butter, mixed with minced fresh garlic, dried thyme, paprika, coarse salt, and freshly cracked black pepper, making absolutely sure to get the butter mixture under the skin and all over the top so the flavor would penetrate deep into the meat during the long roasting time. The chicken thighs roasted uncovered in a hot oven preheated to 425 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 to 60 minutes until the skin was deeply golden brown, crispy, and crackling, and the meat was cooked through to an internal temperature of 165 degrees with no pink remaining near the bone. The butter melted into the chicken as it roasted slowly in the oven, keeping the dark meat incredibly juicy and tender, while the minced garlic and dried herbs created a flavorful, aromatic crust on the crispy skin that crackled loudly when you bit into it. Garlic butter roasted chicken thighs cost around $2 to feed a family of 6 in the 1950s, making it one of the most affordable and budget-friendly dinners a housewife could prepare. Chicken thighs were 39 cents per pound and usually came 6 to 8 thighs per package depending on the size. Butter was 60 cents a pound, and fresh garlic cloves and dried herbs were just pennies at the local grocery store. The finished chicken thighs had crispy, golden, crackling skin that shattered and crackled when you bit into it, and the dark meat underneath was juicy, tender, flavorful, and infused with garlic butter in every single bite from the bone all the way to the crispy skin. This wasn't a fast food fried chicken leg with artificial breading full of chemicals and preservatives, or a frozen chicken patty reheated in a microwave and served on a dry, stale bun with wilted lettuce. It was real bone-in chicken roasted slowly with real butter and real fresh garlic until crispy, juicy, and absolutely delicious with natural ingredients and real flavor. No fast food chicken meal, bucket of fried chicken from a drive-through window, chicken sandwich wrapped in paper, or any other drive-through meal could compete with the crispy, juicy, garlicky perfection of roasted chicken thighs served hot from the oven with creamy mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and warm buttered dinner rolls on the side for a complete and satisfying dinner that tasted like Sunday supper at Grandma's house every single time you made it. These 30 forgotten dinners from the 1950s prove that homemade food will always beat fast food in flavor, quality, and value. Every single dish on this list was made from scratch with real ingredients you could pronounce, cooked slowly with care and attention, and served hot to families who gathered around the dinner table every night. Buttermilk fried chicken had crispy skin that crackled. Pot roast fell apart with a fork. Meatloaf stretched ground beef into 2 meals, and roasted chicken filled the house with the smell of Sunday dinner. These weren't shortcuts or processed foods. They were real meals made by grandmothers who knew how to cook without boxes, bags, or drive-through windows. Fast food companies want you to believe that convenience is worth sacrificing flavor, nutrition, and quality. They sell burgers made from mystery meat, chicken nuggets filled with fillers, and sandwiches wrapped in paper that taste like cardboard. But the 1950s proved that real food doesn't have to be complicated, expensive, or time-consuming. A whole roasted chicken cost less than a bucket from KFC and tasted 10 times better. Which of these 30 forgotten dinners surprised you the most? Did your grandmother make pot roast every Sunday? Or did she fry chicken in a cast-iron skillet? Drop a comment below telling us. What state are you from? Which 1950s dinner brought back the strongest memory? Hit that subscribe button so you never miss our deep dives into disappearing food history, forgotten recipes, and the meals that put fast food to shame. Let's bring real cooking back, one recipe at a time.